Good morning, everyone. Wherever you are in the world, I hope you and your loved ones are healthy and safe. My name is Randy Bell, and I'm the director of the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council. Thank you all for joining us today for EnergySource Innovation Stream, where we highlight new energy technologies with the potential to reshape the global energy system. Today, we will be hearing from Jennifer Kurtz, director of the Energy Conversion and Storage Systems Center at the National Renewable Energy Lab. She will discuss NREL's new research platform, Advanced Research on Integrated Energy Systems, or ARIES for short. But before we get started, we have a quick poll and two administrative details. So Roger, let's start the poll. Today, we'd like to get your thoughts on this question. What are the greatest challenges of introducing a new technology to an existing energy system and from an operations perspective? So you have multiple choices: cybersecurity, asset visibility, controlling multiple interconnected devices, integration with existing technologies, or managing intermittency. So everybody, please take this poll, and then we'll send the results at the end. So we will, Roger, just let us know when that is done. In the meantime, I have several administrative details. First, you can follow us on Twitter at AC Global Energy and use the hashtag InnovationStream. Second, after Jen's presentation, you can submit questions through the Q&A function on Zoom, and I will try to get to as many of these as I can. If you're watching on another platform like YouTube or Twitter, unfortunately, we cannot take your questions. So thank you to all those who participated in the poll. And now let me welcome Jen Kurtz to the Atlantic Council. Jen, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here today.
So Jen, how are you and how is NREL managing through COVID? I mean, it's been 9 months or so since we've all gone onto some version of remote work. Wondering how that's impacted NREL's research and the programs that you're advancing.
Yeah, it has been a challenging time, just like everybody right now. We went through a period where we went to what we call min-safe. And so everybody had left campus. We have a lot of laboratory research activities. So that was a challenge. We had to make sure that everything was safe. And what we've done is really a very prescribed and deliberate approach to bringing people back on campus. We've also really expanded our capabilities for virtual working. And so just like so many people, we've really explored the connections that we can make and doing things like this. So I'm really pleased to say that we are working safely for all of our laboratory work. We're able to maintain people on campus and to keep those laboratory experiments continuing. And we have many of our staff are working as best we all can virtually.
That's great. That's great to hear. Fantastic that you're able to keep the important research going. I think I said we've been on remote work for 9 months. It's actually more like 7. And I would say it feels like 9, but it really feels more like 3 years or something.
It's either just 1 month ago or 3 years ago.
Time has lost all meaning.
Yeah.
Well, we do have some time meaning here in that we have a half an hour for this program, about 25 minutes left. So why don't we turn over to your presentation, and we'll go through that and then go to Q&A in 10 minutes or so.
That sounds great. And if you could just confirm that everybody can see my screen okay?
Looks great.
Okay. Well, very good. Again, I am so pleased to be here today and to share a little overview on our advanced research on integrated energy systems, or ARIES. And what I'm going to talk to you about very quickly today is give you that overview. So I want to explain what we're trying to do with this research platform and research activity, and then also explain some of the details of that. What are pieces that make this unique and complementary in the broader context of energy research. And then I want to wrap up and talk about things like partnerships. And then I'm really looking forward to the questions and answer section. So ARIES, there's a couple of fundamental challenges that we are working on. We have put together a research platform that is designed to really answer the three questions bulleted on this slide. The first one is variability in physical size of all of the different energy technologies being added into the system. And the physical size is a challenge because it varies. It can look at the bulk power system or large scale centralized energy technologies, all the way to highly distributed energy technologies and everything in between. The second fundamental challenge that we're working on is securely controlling large numbers of interconnected devices. And I think we can all see in how we use electricity, how we connect with energy, how we connect with one another. Those avenues, those pathways have increased significantly. And that's on the things that we're using. We are also looking at interconnected devices upstream of our energy consumption as end users. And all of those things can present challenges when we put them all together. The third fundamental challenge that we're working on within the ARIES umbrella is integrating multiple diverse technologies. Something that is very exciting for me right now, looking at all of the options that we have for our energy system, whether it be on the generation side, storage, or the demand side. But putting all of those things together in ways that the entire system will work is a challenge. So those are the three fundamental challenges we're working on. And this is part of the why. What we want to do is have this research platform allow us to accelerate the innovations with this future energy system so that we can realize these things sooner rather than later. Another important piece that I want to highlight that's part of the mission for ARIES, and that's looking at optimization, security, and reducing risk so that when systems get deployed into the real world, we have identified potential failures and risk mitigation so that we don't have negative consequences when we put all of these things together in the real world. Another piece that's very important here is within the ARIES research platform is what we call at scale. What we're looking at on this particular slide is two physical campuses that's part of NREL, or the National Renewable Energy Lab. On the right-hand side is the Energy Systems Integration Facility. This facility is really looking at loads and storage, and that's what's shown on the bottom right-hand side of this chart. We're looking at energy technologies such as vehicles, batteries, inverters, less than 2 megawatts. But we know when we look at the entire energy system that we need to go bigger, and understanding the energy system at larger scales is part of what our Flatirons Campus is doing with our research. And that's shown on the left-hand side of this slide. We have hardware capabilities up to 20 megawatts. And this allows us to study and look at both generation and storage again, and also transmission and distribution for a wide range of those energy technologies. Now, these two facilities are not sufficient in and of themselves because we know that our energy system can get much larger. And so what we are doing is developing a virtual emulation environment that will allow us to really expand, not only in size, but also in the numbers of energy technologies that we integrate into one system. So those three pieces are the fundamental aspects of our research platform for ARIES. What I've identified here is a set of differentiating characteristics. And what we mean by this is, how does this research complement other things that are happening within the energy system research space right now? On the upper right-hand side of this is a diagram that we're looking at that just shows some of those connection points that I just talked about with respect to the research platform. Now, it is very important for us in this space that we have a combination of hardware, analysis, and modeling so that all of those things together will actually help us accelerate and remove barriers and help introduce new ideas into the marketplace with key industry and academic partnerships. Another piece that is critical to the ARIES is the flexibility. And you can get a little bit of sense of that, whether we have a battery or we've got thermal storage, we're looking at substation or flexible building loads. We are looking at complex system configurations and integrating them into real world situations. And so we can actually advance and push the boundaries of these technologies, both current and prototype technologies. Another important aspect of ARIES is to actually look at the entire system, and that's looking at generation, demand, and storage all together. And by looking at the whole system, we expect to advance the individual technologies as well as the capabilities of whole systems faster than if we were doing these separate. The last important and critical piece to ARIES is partnerships. And the idea with the partnerships is to increase our impact and accelerate that innovation into the market. I mentioned the collaborations, and this is really just a simple, quick snapshot of some of the collaborations that we are already working on. And we recognize that ARIES is not covering everything. It's coming from a big system perspective, but we want to leverage the best and the brightest, not only with our expertise within the National Lab infrastructure, but also capabilities. So what we've identified here are some of those early complementary and collaborations that we have with national laboratories like Pacific Northwest National Laboratory and Idaho National Laboratory. You'll see a couple others that are listed here. And then general placeholders for industry and academia. Those connections and collaborations, if we're really going to tackle big, challenging energy problems, these collaborations are really important. A couple of examples of some of those things may be connection and understanding energy storage technologies, as well as not just looking at one or two types of generation, but nuclear generation and renewable generation, traditional fossil-based generation. Also understanding the sensors and the monitoring and the safety aspects. Those are all part of these collaborations that we're developing across the US. And my last slide that I want to touch on today before opening it up for questions is this thought that what we're looking at here is an aerial picture of our Flatirons campus. This is just north of our main campus. We're on the west side of the Denver metro area in Colorado. And what you see here is a representation of the types of technologies. We've got the wind turbine right in front. We've got PV fields scattered throughout about 300 acres or so. And this is important because what we're doing is tying and connecting earlier stage research at a smaller benchtop scale and pulling it through and understanding that science of scaling, understanding the connection points and the challenges that we have so that we can, again, accelerate these energy innovations into the real world faster than if we were doing these isolated and we didn't have the ability to scale up. A couple other things that I wanted to just highlight is the diversity of the research activities that are ongoing. So I had briefly mentioned looking at energy storage and generation. So you see renewable generation here. What you don't see are other things like battery energy storage, hydropower, water power. We've got the ability to look at and control grid conditions so we can study faults And this is so important to the ARIES research space, where again, we are looking at what these challenges and potential negative consequences are so that we can address those while we are looking at this whole system, putting it together in real world conditions. And with that, Randy, what I'd like to do is open it up for questions.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was really, really fascinating. Everyone, remember, if you do have questions, please ask them in the Q&A function on Zoom. I want to just get started by going to the poll result, because I think it's interesting and it ties into a lot of the goals with ARIES. So we see that the poll result largest was integration with existing technologies. Second was controlling multiple interconnected devices. And third was intermittency. So maybe you could just talk about how ARIES addresses each of those top three in a little more detail. And I particularly am curious about the intermittency piece, because of course one of the issues that you see as you're putting more renewables on the grid is that it just gets harder and harder to integrate renewables on the grid. And there are different sort of calculations about what the maximum penetration of renewables is. But I think it would be great to learn, to hear how ARIES helps manage that problem.
Yeah, well, this is great. I'm a systems engineer by training, and so seeing integration challenges listed as the top challenges just warms my heart. So thank you all for doing that. In a weird, nerdy sort of way, right? The integration challenges are really compelling, because you can have the best energy technology, but if you can't figure out how to integrate that into our system, it still won't be successful, right? And so one of the things with ARIES and this research platform is our ability to actually, I'll say, plug and play. When you're talking about 20 megawatts energy system, it's not plug and play like, plugging in our power cord kind of thing. But we look at it from that perspective, where let's say we want to put wind and PV and battery together. I'd like to share with you really quickly a story about ARIES and what we're doing right now with our Flatirons Campus. We had a substation failure. So our 20 megawatt substation had a failure in September. And what we did with our research and operations staff is actually stand up a microgrid capability that's renewably generated electricity. We've got battery energy storage, and we're powering our campus with this microgrid. And with the microgrid, we have demonstrated some controls and safety and monitoring aspects already, just to keep our own lights on, if you will. This is really interesting because we're moving that forward into advancing the innovations around things like black start and again, that monitoring and instrumentation and sensing technologies. So that's one of the pieces that we're looking at. Not only are we doing the research, but we're also kind of walking the talk, if you will, with our own renewable grid, microgrid. Now, integration with existing infrastructure, I think, was another challenge. And that's really important. One example that I'd like to share from ARIES and the research portfolio is looking at how do we blend and get more renewable electrons into our fuels market. So one avenue is to produce hydrogen via renewable electrolysis, and then blend that hydrogen or utilize that hydrogen to make methane. And so those are some of the ways that you're actually integrating some of the future energy technologies with our existing energy technologies. Now, the last piece, Randy, I think that you had talked about was intermittency. And energy storage is a critical piece. We have traditionally stored our energy in other ways, like with our fossil, right? With coal stockpiles and things like that. What we do when we have more intermittent renewable generation, we have to store that energy other ways. So one of the 5 research areas for ARIES is actually energy storage. And that energy storage is looking at a wide range of technologies, whether it be mechanical or electrochemical, molecular, and flexible building loads are some of the examples, and thermal. So that's one of the ways that ARIES research is really pushing towards handling that intermittency challenge.
Fascinating. We're starting to get some great questions in the Q&A. I want to ask one more, which is sort of how do you take the learning that you're doing with ARIES and bring it to a utility, or bring it to the real world? Are there any examples where some research that you've done has been utilized by a utility to solve a particular problem? For instance, integrating more renewables.
Yeah, yeah. When we look back in the past, one of the strengths of NREL is actually those partnerships with industry. And so we see that in a couple of ways. Sometimes there's technology transfer, what we call technology transfer. So things that are developed in the lab that industry will utilize. There are some things that I'm thinking of right now around controls and looking at how do you automate and optimize a set of controls for a large wind farm. And so that's an idea that is in development right now on how we want to transfer that technology into industry. And what happens is you actually have an increase in output when you can optimize across a large set instead of just one individual wind turbine on its own. So that's one example that comes to mind.
Fascinating. Okay, I want to turn to some of the questions from the audience right now. They're coming in quickly. I already know we're not going to get to all of them, but I want to first turn to one from Atlantic Council Senior Fellow Greg Duque, who asks if ARIES can take climate risks to the grid into account. And so, even more broadly than that, what type of risks can you take into your modeling, to your system, and how does that all work?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the first thing that comes to mind is I mentioned and didn't get into this detail, but we've got 5 major research areas. And cybersecurity and resiliency is one of those 5. I mentioned energy storage as another one. And I think, Greg and Randy, that's the place where we're really thinking about how do we understand that situational awareness. And the situational awareness can be a lot of things. And I think that's what you were talking about, Randy. There's the climate risks, but there's also a number of other things that we need to take into account. So situational awareness is a major part of the research that we're working on. Proactive defense. So identifying that risk and that threat, and then also automating the response to that. So we have a cyber energy emulation platform where we're developing and simulating with hardware in the loop the ability to look at those risks and make sure that there's a handful of things that we think of for the future energy system. Affordability is one of them. Sustainability and lower net carbon is another one. And then resiliency and reliability. Those are critical. So I'm rambling a little bit, but it's a really important and exciting area of research. And I think that climate piece and other external threats are all factored into that cybersecurity and resiliency research focus area.
Fascinating. Yeah, I mean that's such a challenge to address all of those various threat vectors that you see in the grid, particularly as there are more and more devices as energy generation becomes more distributed.
Right.
I want to turn to a question from Dan Maloney, who asks, at 20 megawatts, how do you handle demand fluctuations?
One of the things that is another important part of the ARIES research is to look at how we can mimic and simulate and emulate the different types of scenarios that our energy systems are going to be put into when we put them in the real world. So flexible demands, there's a couple of ways that we do it on the research side. And Dan, I'm not quite sure if I'm hitting exactly what you were talking about, but we dynamically and statically control demands so that we can look at what the interface and interferences are upstream with generation. And that also factors into how we look at storage. How do we use storage as some of that buffer with our demand, especially when our generation isn't as controllable as like it traditionally has been?
Got it. So I'm going to take a question from Vineet Sharma. I'm going to modify it a little bit. He asks about how the platform scales, and so thinking more, along the lines of how do you use what you're learning here when you're working on a grid that has some assets that are 1,000 megawatts, where you have these really big power generation assets, along with small scale storage, along with microgrids, along with rooftop solar, et cetera. So how does what you're learning here apply to a grid which has much wider variation in the size of its assets?
Yeah. The first and quickest answer is we utilize that virtual emulation environment. We know that it is not feasible for us to have hardware for every different system that we could imagine or configure, and every size that we have. And so what we take is a series of mathematical models, empirical based models to help us build that virtual emulation environment. And that's where we get the most amount of flexibility with ARIES and the energy systems and the configurations that we're studying.
Got it. Got it. Really, really interesting. What you're doing is hugely important. Okay, I want to take a question from John Hansen, who asks if you can talk a little bit more about the role, challenges, and opportunities of virtual power plants and software and digital platforms to increase efficiency, supporting distributed energy resources, and helping to transform legacy infrastructure. So that's a lot. Maybe just focus on the VPP for now, and then if there is a question about sort of digitalization and the role that's playing, we can get to that second.
Yeah. So a couple of things come to mind when I'm thinking about that question. One is coming back to that virtual emulation environment. One of the pieces, again, in that research space, that research platform, is to look at the configurations. What we're able to do is actually study whether it be virtual power plants or other configurations. We can study those configurations in a safe and controlled environment, and then simulate and mimic those cyber threats, for instance, or faults with our energy system. And what that allows us to do is play what if, and take exactly that question. So right now, I don't have the answer for that. If it's, how are we actually going to be using it? But this ARIES research platform allows us to do that what if. And we can do that what if with industry partners and academic partners and other national labs in a way that can be beneficial for a large set of stakeholders.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Got it. Okay, we have time for two more questions, and I'm going to selfishly take the last question. So the second to last question is going to come from Terry Lane, and it's about electric vehicles. And he wants to know if ARIES can help promote the adoption of electric vehicles. And I'd like to add on to that, which is, how do you think about electric vehicles when you're modeling the grid and working on the grid through this platform?
Yeah. What we're seeing is so many more devices are becoming electrified, including on our transportation. And so barriers that we traditionally had are going away. We have to figure out how to have these different technologies work together. One of the fundamental challenges that we've been working on. So with electric vehicles, we're also looking at it as bidirectional. And so in our traditional energy system, it's pretty serial, right? You go from step A to step B. With this new energy system that we're working on within ARIES, those steps are much more iterative and circular. So that's how we look at putting electric vehicles into the grid. And Randy, I'm sorry, I forgot the second part of that.
That's perfect.
Okay.
That is a great way to answer that question. It's the bidirectionality that I think really makes it interesting, and where your work is going to add real value. There's lots of discussion about that, but making that real at the sort of consumer level, I think is going to be the real challenge. Okay, as I said, I'm going to selfishly end with a question from me, which really ties to some of the work that we're doing at the Atlantic Council right now, which is as you're thinking about hydrogen. As a potential something that potentially gets added onto the grid, whether you're talking about electrolyzers or using hydrogen to generate power. So thinking of it in two different ways. How do you think about hydrogen and its role in capturing curtailed power from renewables,
Yeah.
Curtailed wind and curtailed solar, and how does that compare to using battery storage for that power instead?
Yeah. So with curtailed energy, this is an important aspect of a big, what we call the big idea in the research, national lab research space with the Department of Energy, and that's hydrogen at scale. It's definitely worth checking out for anybody who's interested in hydrogen, because what low cost renewable electrons does is actually drive down the hydrogen production cost, opening it up to a much wider set of markets so that we can get green hydrogen molecules not only in the industrial side, but also in the transportation side and getting to things like heavy duty trucks. So that's very exciting within ARIES that ties into what we're trying to do with integrating both existing infrastructure as well as new energy technologies together and pulling hydrogen, not wasting low cost and renewable electrons.
Got it. Okay, we are out of time. Thank you, Jennifer, for this remarkable presentation. Really fascinating work, what you're doing. Looking forward to working with you. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to Innovation Stream this week. We really appreciate all the questions, and the repeat viewership we have is remarkable. I hope you will all join us for the next episode of Innovation Stream next week, featuring Michelle Brechtelsbauer, the Director of Stakeholder Relations at the Energy Impact Center, who will discuss Open 100, the world's first open source platform for the design, construction, and financing of nuclear power plants. That's October 30th at 10 a.m. Now, I'm told, we have half an hour, 10 a.m. to 10:30. I'm told 10:30 to 11, she will be building her own nuclear power plant, and we'll have a separate stream for that. You can watch that in her basement. Then we have a whole bunch of other events happening next week. On Thursday, October 29th at 11:30 a.m., we'll host a discussion on the launch of the US-Europe Energy Bridge, which is the next evolution of USAID's energy sector assistance in Europe and Eurasia. That same day at 1 p.m., we'll host an event on strengthening global safeguards and security in an advanced nuclear age. So looking at Gen 4 nuclear and what that means for safeguards and security. You can find out about these events and much more on the AC website, atlanticcouncil.org. Thank you to everyone who helped put this event together, including Laura Macedo, Roger Morales, Emma Smith, and Olga Kokova. This presentation will be available on the Atlantic Council website, YouTube, Facebook, and Twitter, so please do share it with your colleagues. Thank you, Jennifer. Really, really appreciated this. I learned a lot. And thank you again for everyone who tuned in. Looking forward to seeing you all next week.